Stillwater's Morning Scramble, and the mayor's in, Will Joyce.
Good morning, Steve.
Good Monday morning to you.
Yeah.
You are in your work outfit today.
Casual today.
No, I like that.
More casual than it's not a council meeting tonight, so
Yeah.
don't have my tie on.
I guess that is the difference, though.
Yeah.
But you have your work clothes on.
Normally, yeah. Sometimes when on council meetings, well, most of the times when I have council meetings, I try to, because I work at a tech company, Steve, so suits and ties are not part of the normal attire. Mostly what I have on today.
That's dress casual, though. That's very. That looks great.
It's one of those days.
It is. It's one of the. We were talking beforehand about you can't be surprised anything that happens in 2020, but we were talking sports actually a little bit with, and it seemed like that just kind of fit this year, but it was so shocking and stunning. I saw you retweeted some stuff right away, or you were basically that others were doing.
Yes.
And so you could feel that. But what I thought, Will, was interesting was the national response, because it's one thing seeing, now we're Oklahoma State, so we're going to be, like it or not, see it from our own eyes. But when you see Jay Billis and people like this going, are you kidding me?
No one has come out and said that seemed like a reasonable thing for the NCAA to do, which honestly, I don't know if we could look back at much that some people have come out and said, yeah, the NCAA did the right thing there.
Yeah, but I may be way offline, but with the appeal, which we're going to have an appeal, I think we have a shot, because I haven't seen anybody. What are they going to do to Kansas, for crying out loud?
I mean that's the. It's difficult to even talk about it because I get so crazy about it, but yeah, I mean, but I've seen all this stuff like, oh man, Kansas better be worried, and NC State and some of these other places better be worried if that's what they're going to do to Oklahoma State. Then gosh, imagine what they're going to do to Kansas. They're not going to do anything to Kansas. They never do anything to Kansas. They never do anything to Duke. They never do anything. I mean,
maybe
North
with
Carolina.
Well, that's what we were talking about. North Carolina. Roy Williams had all his students taking tests by somebody else.
Yeah, for years.
And then claimed he never even heard of that at a university.
Yeah.
He was outright, I've never heard of this. An easy course? I've never heard of that. And then they got off pretty much scot-free.
It is, yeah.
But maybe this is my thought, maybe my hope, maybe the outrage prior to them making the announcement, they can't let them off scot-free.
Well, they certainly can. That's the problem, is that the NCAA has no outside, control. There's nobody that you can go to and say, hey, the NCAA is, not being fair here. I mean, you can sue them, but it's a voluntary organization, right? So, I mean, you'd have to sue them for breaching their contract, the membership agreement, basically, that you have in the NCAA. And that's,
Boy, and watching Coach Boynton and stuff, so much class exuded on Friday, I thought.
Mike Boynton is, I feel so bad for Coach Boynton because he has been just such a fantastic addition to our community. I mean, Coach, he was one of the very first people that reached out to me after sort of the COVID stuff started and said, what can I do? Where does the community need help? Is there anything I can do? He was one of the very first people that reached out to me last week when we were, had local, protests around the Black Lives Matter issues, and reached out and said, hey, I want to be involved in community conversations. What can I do to help? What can I do? He supports nonprofits in town. He is part of just community work. He's talked to us about how he can help economic development issues. I mean, Coach is an integral part of the community, and none of that stuff is stuff that he does in front of a camera or puts out a press release about. I mean, he is not out there trying to, create an image. He's out there doing this stuff for real because he cares about people. He cares about the community. He's trying to be a part of this community, and to see, the level of not only bad luck that the program's had over the last couple of years and some injuries and that sort of thing, but then that just outright unfairness of this kind of a punishment given the amount of work he's put in. I mean, honestly, it just makes me feel terrible for Coach Boynton because, I mean, he's done nothing but the right thing since he's been here.
Last year, I think it was last year, they run together now. He went and represented or stood by the teachers in Oklahoma City. And I remember reading his response on that. And it wasn't like they had a staff meeting and saying, we go out and do these things, which wouldn't have been bad either. But they asked why he was there, and he said, I was asked. Yeah. A teacher basically said, hey, would you be mind to stand beside us in this? And so he showed up at the Capitol, handed out water, if I remember right. And so it didn't come from, a plan or whatever. I was asking. It seemed like the right thing to do.
And I don't. Coach Boynton doesn't do any of that stuff for publicity or for PR purposes and that kind of thing. But and so I kind of hesitate to even say, hey, he's reached out and we've talked about these kinds of things, because I know that's not why he does it. I mean, doesn't do that stuff so he can get recognized for it. But in a lot of ways, he should be recognized for it, right? I mean, the stuff that he does. But even just the little things, like I take my kids to drop my kids off at Westwood in the morning, going to school, and pretty much every morning I'm there. He's walking his kids in, taking them, into class. Just such a good guy, a class individual, somebody who just really, every time you see him, he's doing something to help somebody, and that's the first thing that came to my mind. I mean, and I don't know the players, but I feel the same way about his players in the program that are having to be deal with a punishment that has literally nothing to do with anything that they've had been a part of.
And how can that argument not be a winning argument in the fact that you're punishing people, and and I know people that know Bill Self real well.
Yeah.
And not that this is true or anything, but the speculation has been for a long time, if the hammer gets dropped at Kansas, he's just going to the NBA.
They just leave. I mean, where is Brad Underwood in this whole conversation? I got to go back and look it up, but I mean, this is one of the things I think I tweeted back. I'm pretty sure the NCAA said at some point, oh, well, we're going to start holding these coaches accountable, right? Even if they leave the program or even if they move on or whatever, we're going to go chase them down.
Right.
Because where's Underwood? I mean, Stephen F. Austin had some problems after he left.
Right.
This thing, I mean, he's the one that brought in Lamont Evans. He's the one that was in control of the program when this stuff happened. How is he not being, so he's off making $3-4 million a year in Illinois to win 4 games a year, whatever he's winning. But I mean, I don't. It's so. Yeah. I mean, you just objectively know nothing. I mean, my wife, who does not follow sports closely, but likes OSU basketball.
I have a feeling that she knows a little bit more about this situation than the average person.
Well,
thanks to you.
we hadn't even talked. It's not like when sports stuff happens, I do not text my wife and say, "Hey, did you see this thing that happened in sports?" But she texted me I just what is going on with this OSU thing? This is awful. Because she had just talked to a couple people and listened to a couple things, and for somebody who doesn't really pay close attention and doesn't care about the NCAA politics, I mean, she was, she's like, how does that? How can they punish these kids and Coach Boynton for stuff that literally has nothing to do with anything they've ever done? And
that's gone on in one shape or form forever. It's the fact that the next group of people who weren't here at the time, had nothing to do with it, faced the music.
Yeah.
What was interesting was I heard it. I don't remember what all I did when I got off. I had errands to run or whatever. But when I was in my car and Jordan Woodruff here and Robert were on, and they were breaking the news. This is right after I got off, right? And you sit there and you go, you're kidding. Because I just had a little break with Tom Dorado. We were speculating on what it might be, and it was a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
Like a visit. You might have a couple of visits. And it worked in the opposite when the news came out, because they were absorbing it at first. I could hear the frustration.
Yeah.
And as it went along further and you really understood what was going on, people got madder and madder because you were starting to understand the severity of it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just sad. It really is. I mean, I like I said, I could rant and rave about
that's what this is for. We get a little,
but really it's sad. It's sad for Coach Boynton. It's sad for those players, the incoming guys who kind of had plans for what was going to happen, and literally nothing to do. And I think I saw something from the NCAA last week or in response to something that said, oh, well, sure, every time we have to put a punishment in place, it necessarily is going to affect some people that didn't have anything to do with it, which is just such an awful cop-out. Just say, oh, well, sorry, sometimes there's collateral damage, there's nothing we can do about it. Of course there is. I mean, there's so much they can do about it.
Absolutely. You mentioned Coach Boynton. To go back to him, because I saw where he called every single player.
Yep.
Let them know. I saw a story last week, and it's a new coach. I think we're talking Florida State here, where he issued a statement.
It was Florida State.
Saying how, I've been, had dialogue. I've contacted all my players, let them know I'm there for them. And they came out and said he issued a blanket statement. He hadn't talked to any of us.
Yeah, he sent a form text to everybody.
I mean, he was just flat out putting on a show. And that's the difference in the real deal and that.
And that's why it's so frustrating. It's so maddening because, the OSU's seen coaches come and go in all sports over, I mean, we've all
Sure.
coaches come and go. I mean, you just see it all the time, and you see the ones that are real and genuine, and see the ones that aren't quite so much, and the ones that are, I mean,
Right.
we've kind of we have a history of seeing these folks come in, and OSU is actually, in a lot of ways, we have a lot of homegrown folks, right? People who, Coach Gundy and Coach Holiday and folks who
John
are
Smith,
OSU guys, Coach Smith, I mean, so you kind of like, they understand what it's like in Stillwater, and sometimes the outsiders, folks who aren't OSU people, get a little bit, it's a little tougher for them, or it's harder for them. I think Coach Ford, was an example of that where it's a
I
little
think
harder
he's
for them
more
to kind of
attached to
get engaged.
Stillwater than he ever has
Oh my
been.
gosh!
Almost.
I mean, he was back for the Boone Pickens Memorial. I talked to him at the Boone anyway. But for Coach Boynton, to come in not as an OSU guy and really to invest himself so much in the community, you see that. I mean, and you kind of give it a year or so. Say, is this really? Is he just waiting for his next? Is he going to try to win a few games and get to his next opportunity or whatever? But I mean, it's so maddening and so frustrating and so sad because we've seen Coach Boynton for several years now and do nothing but what's best for his program, what's best for the university, what's best for the community, and to engage and invest himself at a level that he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to do that stuff. He doesn't have to be engaged at that level. And then, you see guys who are clearly not as genuine and not as concerned.
Rick Pitino's coming back to coach, and he's on tape authorizing a $100,000 check to somebody.
I mean, and this is the same conversation, a little bit of different context that we've been having for years about Eddie Sutton not being in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Right. Where people like Pitino and Calipari and some of these guys are, and you're just like, it's flabbergasting to think how somehow this establishment chooses, which people get rewarded and which ones don't, and how it does not line up at all with any sort of objective, understanding of who these people are.
Yeah, you mentioned Calipari. There's speculation, and with great cause at Kentucky, they're the one and done school, and it's legal. It's perfectly legal, and he acknowledges that's what I go after and stuff. But the way I understand, it's based on their GPA stuff for the last semester. So there's every chance that after January, a great deal of that team does not even go to class.
Yeah.
When you watch Kentucky, they're not the freshmen that are going on. The others have to because if you're going to be there for a while, you've got that accountability. But once it's March Madness is over, they're done.
Yeah.
So he's got players that aren't even really students.
Yeah. No, I mean,
that's what's Paul and GPA wise and stuff academically. We've been hitting the ball out of the park here.
We've done a good job, and we say all this, and I actually started to write a post about this and sort of the unfairness of it, and really directed towards Coach Boynton and his involvement, and how it's just really just not it's so unfair and such a travesty, really. But at the same time, you do have to recognize that it did happen. It happened at the university. We have, OSU is not a paragon of virtue in all regards, right? I mean, we've had our troubles and incidents where people didn't do the right thing. And hey, when Mon Evans was here, he wasn't a coach here. He was taking bribes, and he pleaded guilty to federal crimes.
Right.
So I mean, so there's some. I don't think anybody wants to sort of sweep that under the rug or not acknowledge that there was a problem, or that the university, has a responsibility to deal with that. But it's just, again, I mean, so if you could say, well, the athletic department ultimately, is at fault for allowing this sort of thing to happen. Well, okay, well, punish the athletic department overall. I mean, make it a huge fine. Make it, do something like that where you're talking about, okay, we want the organization to understand that, yeah, it was just an employee and he was just acting out of personal gain, but you still have a duty to deal with that. Okay, fine. But I mean, to take it
on Cade Cunningham
and just, I mean, the full brunt of this punishment falls on coaches and players who had absolutely nothing to do with it. And really, I mean, you're talking about student athletes who's, this is they're auditioning for jobs. They're working towards a career in whether it's playing or potentially coaching or whatever it is. And you're you're creating a significant hindrance for the job training and future career prospects of people. I mean, who have literally nothing to do with anything. It's so appalling. It is just.
When you see those PSAs that they run during stuff, you almost roll your eyes now, right?
About
it's all about
care
the
about
students.
the student athletes, and I mean the NCAA is just a joke. It has been for a long time. It's really sad because you can it's so transparently geared around making money, and I will say this too. I mean I think OSU's a member of the NCAA voluntarily, right? They're not forced to be, and all of the member institutions that are part of this organization, it's not some outside force that nobody has control over. I mean, the institutions themselves have control over the NCAA to some degree, and I think reform and fixing these problems is going to have to come from the member institutions standing up and saying, we're not going to put up with this. This is crazy.
Well said. So kind of therapy, Monday morning therapy.
But
I'm glad we had that talk too, because I think we all felt that way when you saw it, and you watched more of the response from around the country, because we all have our own glasses here, our lens to look through. And when you saw Jay Billis and Fran Fraschilla and people like this come out and make statements,
not even Sports Illustrated was going to stand up and say this was a fair.
I didn't see their statement.
I haven't seen anybody.
I haven't either.
Who came out and said, well, really it is the right thing, because there's always that. I mean, it's sports talk, right? I mean, there's always going to be somebody that stands up and says, well, I think OSU should have got hit harder, or something like that.
When are we going to know more about Kansas?
That's the other thing. Who knows? I mean, they fought. They're fighting the whole thing. They're not cooperating, right? So that makes it take longer. And that.
Well, they had this loaded class this year, and that's what everybody was saying. They'll fight this. They'll maybe go to the Final Four, and then Bill Self will go on and sign a $9 million contract with the NBA.
So here's my question: Do you get, if you're Coach Boynton, do you convince these recruits to come in and say, listen, let's just go 31-0, and then and
did you see his quote?
Make everybody understand that this was going to be the best team in the country, and then just.
I wish I had it in front of me, but he said, he's going to go over all the options with them, with each player, and I thought that was an awesome answer.
Right.
He mentioned G League and stuff like that, and it's sort of like, I'm going to discuss what is best for each one of these individuals, and I'm sure you're going Oklahoma State is best, but there are other things, and you need a guy who will what do you think?
Yeah, well,
and knowing that he really cares about what's right for you.
Because if you're, if he knew that they weren't going to be able to play in the postseason coming up this year, would he, he wouldn't be out there recruiting some of these guys and trying to make them, think that it was going to be great and, oh yeah, we're going to, I mean, your
loyalty here would have been waning, I think, if you would have seen this coming.
Sure.
Well, that's not fair to say.
Well, but I mean, if you knew about it ahead of time, or you knew that it was a distinct possibility, or that you felt it was, or whatever, I mean, he would have been honest with those recruits in the process, right? And so I think from his standpoint, he's kind of sitting there going, man, I brought these guys in and had, these kids committed based on what we saw as the future of the program and what the possibilities were. And if that's not the case, he's not going to try to sugarcoat that or obfuscate it, or, he's going to say, listen, okay, if this is the case, if this is what we have to deal with, here's what your options are. And that, again, I mean, it's Mike Boynton. I mean, he's going to, I think, act in the best interest for those kids and try to figure out what's the best thing for them to do. I mean, this isn't what he sold them when he recruited them to be here. And so
I love your plan of winning 31 games, though.
I think they should just go out and win them all and just say, oh, we didn't let us in the tournament. Well, everybody knows we were the best team anyway.
And then the storyline along the way, you hope, would have been, why?
Exactly.
What did they do?
Exactly. I mean, in every game that we play that's on TV, every point in that conversation would be, this is insane that this team isn't going to be, allowed to go play in the tournament.
And I think that narrative works. I think it worked with Eddie Sutton. It should have worked years ago, but Fran Fraschilla, I think, helped with that process. Almost every ESPN game they had, they mentioned the fact that why isn't he in?
Yeah.
And so that was almost spearheaded by, I think, Fran, and because he said, he mentioned to his colleagues and stuff, hey, when you're around this program and you're around Scott and stuff, you might carry this narrative. And I think it made a difference because it was mentioned all year long.
Absolutely.
And thank God he got elected.
Yep.